What if I told you thousands of government jobs were cut and no one can clearly explain who actually made the final decision? Because what just happened in this hearing between Steny Hoyer and RFK Jr. raises serious questions about power, accountability, and control.
I'm not going to ask questions about specific issues about which I'm very concerned. I subscribe, frankly, to the remarks that Mr. Lauro, our ranking member, made, however, Mr. Secretary, with reference to my concerns about what is happening. First of all, let me ask you this.
Sorry about that.
You submit a budget, it goes to OMB, the president will submit it to us, and Congress passes a budget, sends it to the president, presumably the president signs it. Once that happens, do you consider that budget that Congress passes to be a suggestion or directive?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, it's the president's budget, and my duty is to defend it. It's Congress's choice about whether or not they're going to fund. Congress appropriates the funding. Congressman, there's no agency head that I know of that wants to see his agency gutted or his budget lowered. There's tremendous waste in my agency. It grew by 38% during the Biden administration, and public health went down.
Okay, I got 5 minutes.
But I just say this. President Trump has a broader vision than me, which is that the $2 trillion we're spending a year that we don't have is landing on our children. That is a health crisis for them.
Mr. Secretary, my question to you respectfully was, do you believe it is a suggestion or a mandate? This is a very important issue, which we differ greatly with the administration and with Mr. Musk, that willy-nilly, without Congress's approval, they can remove things, take things away, defund things, fire people. That is not my proposition. I want to know whether it is your proposition. You've answered in the sense that once the budget is adopted, you need to carry it out. Now, whether that was President Trump that signed that budget or President Biden that signed that budget, I presume your premise is the same. Is that correct?
I don't know whether you're asking me a rhetorical question, because I think it's self-evident.
It's not a rhetorical question. It's whether or not you think once the Congress says we're going to spend X number of dollars on X objective, Y objective, that you will follow that.
Yes.
Okay, that's the answer I wanted.
Incidentally, that happens throughout history. The Republican.
Throughout history, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, you and I know this. Mr. Nixon said that was not the law. That he could take whatever and he took it as a suggestion, and he wanted to impound, and he did impound in the early 70s, and we passed an act that said you can't do that. Then the Supreme Court heard that case. And very frankly, one of the most conservative judges, Justice Scalia, said President Nixon, the Mahatma Gandhi of all impounders, asserted at a press conference in 1973 that his constitutional right to impound appropriated funds was absolutely clear. Scalia went on to say, our decision 2 years later in Train versus City of New York proved him wrong. That opinion has been reiterated by the Supreme Court subsequent to that decision. This is a critically important issue because there are conflicting opinions. We will try to come to consensus on that. The president has to sign the budget unless we override his veto of the budget. That becomes the law. We think, and a lot of courts over the last 2 months have decided that law is not being followed. So that was my point. Now, let me ask you something. You've reduced the department by 20,000 people, as I understand it. You've been quoted as saying some of those firings were mistakes. In fact, of course, Musk fired 70% of the people when he bought Twitter and then brought a large number of them back because he found out, as you point out, not that with respect to that, but with respect to these 20,000 people, there were mistakes. My question to you is, have you had an analysis prior to making those decisions or Mr. Musk making those decisions? And I ask you first, who made those decisions, you or Musk?
They were made. Ultimately, we executed the decisions.
I know you executed them, but my question
Elon Musk gave us help in figuring out where there was waste, fraud, and abuse in the department. But it was up to me to make the decision. And there are many instances where I pushed back and said, we don't want to, that would hurt us to eliminate that group.
Let me ask you a question based upon that response. Was there an analysis of the consequences of these cuts and the reduction in force and elimination of programs? Was there an analysis that you can provide the committee that indicated those, as you concluded in your statement, would not harm people would not undermine, frankly, the people who are being served, the health care not delivered, people not served, children not educated, research not accomplished, frankly, lives not saved. Is there an analysis that you can provide to this committee prior to us determining the budget that will show that, in fact, those cuts will not be harmful to those objectives?
Yeah, I mean, there were analysis. The simplest analysis was at the outset, the analysis that we're spending $2 trillion a year that we don't have.
Mr. Musk said he was going to cut $2 trillion.
Spending $2 trillion more than you have to make cuts. The other analysis that was more detailed is that
children or the Indians that you're so concerned about?
we didn't cut the Indians. We didn't cut the Indian services.
I'm asking you. You said we have to cut.
I made sure that those services were not cut. I made sure that Head Start was not cut. But the cuts that were done were cuts that were to duplication, to redundancy, to streamlining. We increased our workforce 70% in 4 years, so we were going back to the 2019 levels.
Mr. Reagan,
and I would ask.
Mr. Reagan said he was going to cut waste, fraud, and abuse. He increased the budget deficit by 189%, the highest of any president in history.
No analysis.
We're allotted 5 minutes, and I am trying to be lenient, instead of cutting somebody off in mid-sentence. But if y'all could be respectful to me so that we can sort of wrap up when I start tapping. So
Steny Hoyer opens this exchange in a very deliberate way. He doesn't jump straight into accusations. Instead, he starts with something foundational: how a budget is supposed to work in a constitutional democracy. Because here's the core principle he's trying to establish. Congress appropriates money. The president signs it, and once that happens, it becomes law. That is not optional, it is not advisory, it is binding. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because the moment a budget becomes a suggestion instead of a mandate, the entire balance of power between Congress and the executive branch starts to shift. That's why Hoyer presses so hard on this point. He's not just asking a procedural question, he's defending the idea that elected representatives, not unelected officials or outside actors, control public spending. And then the conversation shifts into something much more controversial. He brings up large-scale staffing cuts and reductions in federal agencies, including references to involvement from Elon Musk in advising or influencing efficiency decisions. That's where the tension escalates, because now the issue is no longer theoretical. It's about real people losing jobs, programs being reduced, and services potentially being affected. And the key concern Hoyer is raising is not just that cuts are happening, it's whether those cuts are being made with proper analysis of consequences. Because in government, cutting numbers on a spreadsheet is easy, but understanding what those cuts do in real life, healthcare access, education support, research funding, emergency services, that's the part that cannot be ignored. And that's the real concern Democrats are raising here, not just what is being cut, but who is deciding, how transparent those decisions are, and whether the consequences are being fully considered before action is taken. Because once those guardrails weaken, the impact is no longer just political, it becomes structural. It affects how government serves people at every level. And that's what makes this moment so important.